Welcome to Coffee with Cadro, Nataša, co-founder and CEO of Cadro, redefining investment experiences through innovation and inclusivity. Let's start with the most important question, and that's how do you take your coffee?
In the morning, it's very big filter coffee, so I need sort of just to wake up slowly.
Yeah.
And as the day gets on, the coffee gets shorter and sharper.
Could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
So as a child, my family moved to Kenya when I was in early teens, and I went to school there. And I had lots of friends from all over the world, every colour, every religion, and I had a really wonderful time. It was one of the most horizon-broadening times of my life, and I think it sort of hopefully shaped some of the ways in which I do things and how I think today.
You moved to the UK on your own at a fairly young age. What was that like?
I'd only been to England once. Well, it was with my mum and my brother, so the second time I came was on my own to go to Cambridge for an interview. And I landed at Heathrow from Nairobi, and it turned out that the hotel room my parents had booked wasn't available. And there were no other hotel rooms. This was obviously in the 80s, there were no phones, right? There was the sort of phone where you put coins in, and imagine calling Kenya, the coins go really quickly. My mum said, look, I really can't help you, you're going to have to sort this out yourself. I was 17. So I got on the Piccadilly line, got off at Russell Square, and I knew Russell Square because that's where we stayed last time I came with my family. And I found a YWCA, and I went and got myself a bed. And I remember being put into this sort of dorm with lots of other women. Turns out a lot of them were homeless, and I'll never forget how supportive these women who had nothing, who were really struggling, they were so wonderful to me that evening and that night as we were chatting, and super encouraging. And that was one of my first experiences of being in the UK on my own. What
drew you to the industry, and what were those early days like for you?
First of all, I obviously had an overarching need for financial independence. Obviously, I had no fallback in this country, and going back home would be an embarrassment. It seemed that going into accounting would give me another 3 years of training, a bit more time to kind of look around, figure out the system, which is exactly what happened. And I was originally from Eastern Europe. Country then was called Yugoslavia, now Slovenia, my bit. And so Pricewaterhouse were interested in sort of hiring people from that region because they were expanding there. It was just after the Berlin Wall had fallen, so it kind of worked out very well.
Did you encounter any specific challenges as being a woman in the finance industry?
I didn't in my 20s at all see my gender at all, you know, and I, at Pricewaterhouse at the time, was quite progressive. A lot of senior female partners mentored me, and I didn't see it as an issue. I think it became an issue later, perhaps with motherhood, and perhaps when sort of jockeying for positions sort of comes in your life about in your 30s. You're not a bad mother because you have a job, and you're not a good mother because you don't. You see what I mean? So we have to fulfill so many of our own ambitions as humans in our lives, and there's always going to be a balance.
Tell us a little bit about your time in New York. How was that experience for you?
There was a period when I was on a plane every other week between London and New York. One of the things that springs to mind was I was stuck in New York because the deal overran, and we had a black tie dinner in London, and my husband had to go alone. And I came back and he said, look, can we talk, because I don't like going to a black tie Christmas dinner on my own. You know, this is not quite the life we want. And so it was sort of very early on that, you know, we had a very open discussion about how we can manage career and my ambitions. I changed my career from M&A to wealth management once I became a mother, because it was clear that the job I had was involving long hours, plane journeys, and so much commitment that it was going to be challenging for me to deliver on the home and work front. One of my last M&A deals was in New York, and we were selling a business to UBS, and I got to know them, and they then helped me approach the UBS Wealth Management in London and find a job.
Tell us about moving to LGT, and how was your experience there?
So my sort of mentor at UBS was a guy called David Scott, who set up a company called Vestra. And so I went to join him in 2013 to set up the private office, which was a division that was developed in order to cater to the larger clients, attract larger clients, develop those relationships obviously put together investment program for those individuals. And that was, until Cadro, probably the happiest phase of my career, certainly the first few years, sort of the blank sheet of paper.
What inspired you to co-found Cadro?
You know, once you get comfortable in a job, it's the nail in the coffin of your career. Because who wants to be comfortable in their job? You know, I love learning, and I always thought, where's that Nataša that landed at Heathrow, you know, that went to Russell Square in a tube, that sort of slept with a homeless in YWCA for the night, and I wanted that person back. I didn't want to be the woman with, you know, lots of money going expensive holidays and complaining that the waiters weren't fast enough, sort of tending to every one of my needs. I just thought that was a meaningless existence, and I really wanted that sort of satisfaction of discovery again, self-discovery as well. And so I had been dreaming about sort of pushing myself out of my comfort zone for some time. And you know, the joy of the blank sheet of paper is enormous.
I think just going back, you sat next to Jordan. How did you actually turn that blank piece of paper into what Cadro is now?
The general need for modernization, you know, was apparent. What wasn't so clear for me was my confidence. And I remember Jordan being adamant this was achievable, that we could do this, that it wasn't that hard. And he used to point to entrepreneurs and say, well, if he or she can do it, you can do it. And I thought that's a really lovely kind of positive. He was a hugely positive influence on my thinking, and vice versa, I hope. And so the trick was then how to extract one out of a comfortable job. And that took some time.
One of the most beautiful stories I've heard at Cadro is how Emily joined the team. Could you tell us a little bit about how you met Emily and how she's part of the team now?
My friend is a head of hiring for a big bank, and she was at this mum's night out. And I said to her, look, you get 1,000 applicants, and how many do you take? She said 10. Would you be able just to send me the CVs of the next 10, so your first 10 rejects? And of course, she said, look, I can't. Highly unprofessional. But she says, I bet this girl could do it. And this was a girl that was taking care of a table in the pub. And so it was Emily, and we got chatting, and she'd just come out of university. She was on her gap year, not quite knowing what to do, obviously. And then suddenly some of the mums had remembered her back from school because other kids had known Emily. So then we did the deal, and that was employee number one before we even had an office. Now she's fully qualified, part of our investment team.
So obviously you had to accompany what was essentially a digital experience with a gilded investment committee. How did you go about building that committee?
So David was ex-Standard Bank, HSBC, had lived in Paris, New York, London and Edinburgh. A highly experienced man. He was chief investment officer at Aviva's Wealthify business. And when we hired him and he resigned, I remember he rang and said, Aviva had asked if I would stay on as an external investment committee member at Wealthify, and I knew we'd hire the right guy because they wanted him. You know, very rarely somebody leaves and they still want you involved as a non-exec. Normally these things are so emotional. So David's, he's been brilliant and you know, helped us then set the tone for the rest of the IC, and so we approached many people that we wanted in the industry, very cognizant of different experiences. And so Jonathan Marriott, as you know, he was the CIO of LGT and an old friend. I actually brought him into LGT. Gail Schumacher, we interviewed several people, we spoke to several people. Jordan used an awful lot of his charm and persuasion. And Gail then said, look, I'm really excited about what you guys are doing. She was head of investments at Coutts, CIO at Coutts, and had a plural career. She also chairs the investment committee at Scottish Widows. You know, she's on a board of Scotch Trust, so she's a heavyweight investment veteran.
So it's time now for the quickfire round. I just want you to say the first thing that comes to mind. So first of all, your favourite coffee order.
Double espresso after lunch.
Best piece of advice you've ever received.
Form strong relationships over time, invest in a network.
If you weren't in finance, what career would you have pursued?
I would have definitely been a princess.
Okay. One book or podcast recommendation?
It's called Never Split the Difference, and it's about negotiating. I really enjoyed that book and the podcast.
What's your proudest moment at Cadro?
We had a Christmas lunch, and everybody except for David was there. And just watching how people got on, the sheer talent and enthusiasm in the room, and such wonderful people, I thought I was so lucky and proud that such an incredible bunch of people had decided to join the firm and to make it, great, which is what we're doing.
Nataša, thank you for sharing your inspiring story.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.